Let's have a look at float time in directed networks. And I'm going to use as an example the coffee example that I had used earlier. But this time what I've done is I've just simplified it into a very basic 3-activity project, which involves boiling the kettle, which takes 5 minutes. I've added an activity here, which is add coffee, which takes 1 minute, and another activity here, which is adding the sugar, which also takes a minute as well. Now, I've already done the forward scanning and filled in the dominoes, the top box of each of the dominoes. So 0, adding 1, you get 1, 1, adding 1, you get 2, or you can go from the starting vertex to the ending vertex via this activity, boiling the kettle, which is 5. So obviously you've got to pick the larger number, which means that our project, if it was to say starting at 10 o'clock, and it does help, I think sometimes if you want to think of an actual start time, I just make up an arbitrary one, 10 a.m. Okay, the project's going to finish at 10:05. So I know there's other parts of making a coffee, of course, but I've just for the sake of explanation, I've just focusing on just these 3 basic activities. Now, it's fairly obvious then that if the kettle's going to take 5 minutes to boil, adding the coffee to the cup does not have to be done at 10 a.m. I could add the coffee at 10:02 or even 10:03. In fact, how late could I add the coffee to the cup without delaying the project? So clearly I can't add the coffee at 10:05 because then that would delay the project by a minute. I'd been drinking the coffee at 10:06. So we need to work out then how late could an activity be started without impacting the end time or the actual total time of the project. Okay, so in this case here, we want to try and work out, well, how late could I add the coffee without affecting the end time? So what we're going to do is we're going to do something called backward scanning. And that's where the bottom box of each of the dominoes comes into play. So starting now with the end, all right, the end's 5 minutes, and now we're going to backtrack. Okay, it's a bit like equations, I guess, when you're sort of doing the inverse or the opposite operation. If forward scanning, you're adding numbers. Backward scanning, you're subtracting numbers. Okay, so it's almost the same thing, just sort of in reverse. So starting with 5 minutes, 5. Let's go up to this path here. So 5 minus 1 is 4. Okay. Now we have 2 options then. Now to get to the starting vertex, we can either go from the end vertex to the start directly via this boil the kettle, or we can go via this vertex here via the adding coffee activity to the starting vertex. 4 minus 1 gives you 3. 5 minus 5 gives you 0. Now, because it's the starting vertex, this has to be a 0 anyway, but it's good for you to see that we actually got to take the lower of the 2 numbers anyway. So the 0 goes here at the starting vertex regardless. Okay. In more complicated diagrams, that's a very important point. If there's multiple ways of going backwards to a particular vertex, you enter in, or you put in you write in the lowest number. Okay. Opposite to forward scanning, you put in the higher number. Backward scanning, you put in the lower number. Now we'll get to this float time. So float time, it's a bit like, I guess leeway is probably another way to think of it, or slack time. That really tells you, well, how late could I, or how late could I start an activity without impacting the total time of the project. So by working out the difference between the bottom box of the domino and the top box, that gives you the float time. So in this case here, and then we'll talk about what this is. So float time here is 3 minutes. Okay. So what this means is that I could add the coffee 3 minutes after I start boiling the kettle, because adding the coffee takes a minute, adding the sugar then takes another minute, and that takes you then to 5 minutes. So the float time really tells you how much room or how much can I delay an activity without it impacting the project. Now, if I'm going to fill in the actual start time and end times using the times that I've used here, so at 10 a.m., Okay, I've started boiling the kettle. It's going to end at 10:05. Now, adding the coffee, I could either start that at 10 a.m. Okay. The sugar, the latest I can add the sugar is in fact 10:04. Okay, which means that because the coffee takes a minute, the latest I can add the coffee would be 10:03. And that's where the float time is very important. Okay, so always remember, float time, slack time, leeway, it just means that for certain activities, okay, not all activities will have a float time of anything other than 0, but some activities will have a float time. That means that those particular activities could be delayed or put on hold for a certain amount of time, and it will not impact the end or the finish time of the entire project.